Welcome to Heart of Texas Histories and Mysteries. I'm your host, Em, coming to you from deep in the heart of Texas. Today, I'll be telling you another chilling tale from late 19th century Austin. In the summer of 1896, Mrs. Anna Burt and her two little daughters, 3-year-old Lucile and 17-month-old Elinor, went missing. Anna's husband and the girl's father, William Eugene Burt, known as Eugene, claimed that he had temporarily sent his family out of town. But he himself quickly disappeared from the capital city, raising suspicion among his relatives and acquaintances. Soon enough, everyone in Austin would find out just what had happened inside the Burt residence, and the discovery would be like something out of a nightmare. Born in Arkansas in 1869, Eugene Burt had come to Texas as a young child. His father, William Jefferson Burt, had been an Army doctor during the Civil War and remained a highly respected physician for the rest of his life. In fact, Dr. Burt had been called to the scenes of the 1884 to 1885 Austin servant girl murders, which I just discussed in my last episode. Eugene apparently accompanied his father to the home of Susan Hancock, the second to last victim of the servant girl annihilator. Some have even said that it was Eugene who found the axe that was believed to be the murder weapon and brought it over to his father and the police. Dr. Burt died in 1886, and it's been said that his death had a profound effect on Eugene, who was 17 at the time. Eugene's older brothers, Silas Montrose, who went by Monty, and Horace Roscoe, who went by Roscoe, would later state that while Eugene had previously been lively and outgoing, he became aloof when the boys lost their father. Eugene's mother, Cynthia Palmer Burt, who had gone by the nickname of Cleo, died in January 1896 of nervous prostration. It seems that Mrs. Burt had suffered from mental health issues throughout much of her life, and that these issues ran in her family. The Burt family said that Mrs. Burt's struggles became particularly severe in the last few months before Eugene's birth, and that this negatively impacted Eugene. Eugene was very close to his mother, always making it a priority to visit her, especially in her final years when she lost both her hearing and her eyesight. There's no doubt that the loss of his mother at the beginning of 1896 deeply affected Eugene. Some have speculated that it was what finally and completely sent him over the edge. Eugene's brothers, Monty and Roscoe, grew up to be well-respected, law-abiding citizens and successful merchants in downtown Austin, but Eugene had displayed concerning behavior since his youth. As a boy, he stole a woman's purse and attempted to sell it to the son of his family's pastor, who will come up again later. There was also the time Roscoe's pet rabbit went missing. When the family found it staked to the ground with nails, Eugene immediately admitted that he had done it, saying he wanted to grow up to be a doctor like his father and wanted to understand how the rabbit worked. His troubles continued as an adult. Eugene apparently had a bad temper and was characterized as being prone to drunkenness. He was known for being a petty thief and for being deceitful. He struggled to hold down jobs. His brothers tried to help him and gave him work at their shoe shop. But after they discovered that Eugene had committed forgery and embezzled funds, Monty and Roscoe cut ties with him. We don't know as much about Eugene's wife, the former Anna Powers, but we do know that she was born in New Orleans in 1869. Anna had lost her father, James, in 1886, when she was 17, the same year and at the same age that Eugene lost his father. It seems that Anna was very close to her mother, Eliza, who was a native of Ireland. It also appears that Anna was devoutly Catholic. Reverend Dr. R.K. Smoot, who led the Southern Presbyterian Church at 8th and Brazos Streets, was a longtime family friend of the Burts in addition to being their minister. He stated that shortly after Eugene became engaged to Anna, Eugene came to his house on West 6th Street, seemingly quite intoxicated, and went into a wild tirade against Catholicism. It seems someone had told Eugene that in order to marry Anna, he would need to become a Catholic himself. It's been assumed that ultimately he did what he needed to do to convert. But his rant at Dr. Smoot's was so intense that the Protestant theologian told him it was time to go home. By the summer of 1896, Eugene was barely making ends meet with whatever odd jobs he was able to obtain. Anna sometimes complained to her mother that he was distant, but as far as the Burts' neighbors could tell, he was a caring husband and an especially doting father. They often saw him playing with his two little daughters, carrying them around and holding their hands as he led them on walks. They would see Eugene, Anna, and the children gather in a family embrace on the porch before heading back inside. Eugene was helpful around the house, sometimes even doing the cooking himself. No one had ever witnessed him being cruel toward Anna or the girls. From the outside, at least, the Burts seemed happy. But some cracks were beginning to show. Anna told her mother that she had awoken in the night to find Eugene staring at her. Anna clearly found this unsettling. It seems unlikely that she would have mentioned it to Eliza if she hadn't. There was also another incident at Reverend Smoot's residence. Eugene suddenly exploded while he and Reverend Smoot were arguing about something the Reverend characterized as minor. The Reverend told Anna, who was also present, that she needed to take Eugene home. Behind closed doors, she and Eugene were fighting more and more often, usually over money. Eugene blamed his brothers for his financial problems. Sometime earlier that year, they had pressed charges against Eugene for his misdeeds at the shoe store. He had been indicted and released on bond. He knew that if he were convicted, he would be facing a prison sentence. Anna worried what would become of her and her two little girls if that happened. She also told her mother and sister that she was having premonitions that someone close to her was in danger, and that she thought it was one or both of her daughters. But she was apparently open to Eugene's suggestion that the family move to Dallas for a fresh start, away from his brothers, but near some other relatives who could help him get on his feet. On the morning of July 25th, 1896, a Saturday, Eugene told the Burts' housekeeper and cook, Minnie Sims, to run to the market and buy some meat for his breakfast. Minnie lived in a downstairs room in the Burt home. She had left at around 9 the previous evening to visit friends and family in East Austin and returned at around 11. Anna and Eugene had been getting Lucile and Elinor ready for bed when Minnie departed, and the house had been dark and quiet when she got back. When Minnie asked Eugene if Anna and little Lucile and Elinor would be needing her assistance that morning, he said that he and Anna had had some trouble the night before and that he had sent her and the girls on the early morning train to San Antonio. He claimed that they would be back in a few days. When Minnie returned from the market and was ready to begin cooking, Eugene warned her not to use the cistern. A cat had fallen into it last night, he said, and that was why he had removed the pump handle. Minnie, whose employment with the Burts would be ending that day, helped Eugene finish packing his family's crates in preparation for their move to Dallas. A Mr. Miller would be coming to buy most of Eugene and Anna's furniture. Eugene told Minnie that she could have his and Anna's old mattress. Minnie quickly noticed that some of the ticking was missing, as if it had been cut off intentionally. But when she found Eugene weeping in the dining room, she decided not to ask him about it. Minnie also found it strange when Eugene started pacing in a very nervous and agitated manner, but still she kept her feelings to herself. When she asked Eugene which crate he wanted the family photographs to go into, his response was concerning. Perhaps it was one thing that he wanted to leave the frames for Mr. Miller, but the fact that he instructed Minnie to put the photographs in the trash pile was another thing entirely. Later that day, after Mr. Miller had come to pick up the furniture, Eugene dismissed Minnie and paid her final wages. He went a few blocks south of his home to ship off the crates, then visited a barber shop and dined at the Capitol Hotel at 8th Street and Congress Avenue. He also played numerous games of checkers. Those he played against would later describe his mood as extremely jovial. Later that night, Eugene boarded a train for Dallas. He was friendly with the other passengers, although one of these passengers would later say that Eugene suddenly seemed reflective after speaking sympathetically of a woman on the train he knew to be a recent widow. Soon after arriving in Dallas, Eugene boarded another train and traveled on to Chicago. On July 28th, he secured a room at the New Brunswick Hotel under the name of Mr. Bronson. He must have known that by this point, his deeds back in Austin were coming to light. There are differing stories as to how Anna's mother, Mrs. Eliza Powers, first learned that something was not right with her daughter and grandchildren. According to one version, she ran into Minnie at St. Mary Cathedral on Sunday, July 26th. The cathedral, which still sits at 10th and Brazos Streets, was close to the Burts' home at 207 East 9th Street, and Anna was an active parishioner there. When Minnie mentioned that she regretted not being able to say goodbye to Anna and the children before they left for San Antonio, Eliza immediately became alarmed. Why would Anna and the girls have gone to San Antonio when they didn't know anyone there? Anna and Eugene had had trouble before, and Anna had always come to stay at her mother's home with the children during such times. Another version of the story says that Eliza went over to the Burts' home to visit her daughter and granddaughters, and that Eugene himself told her the Gone to San Antonio story. Regardless of how Eliza found out about the alleged trip, she was suspicious of it from the start. She couldn't shake the feeling that something horrific had happened to Anna, Lucile, and Elinor. On Monday, July 27th, Eliza contacted a detective with the Austin Police Department. He sent 2 officers to the Burt residence, which seems to have been one of several apartments in a large house that had been subdivided. The policeman's presence captured the attention of some local boys, who trailed along after them. None of the Burts appeared to be home. One of the Burts' neighbors stated that a noise had awoken her on the night of July 24th, or perhaps very early in the morning on July 25th. But she had looked outside, seen nothing, and returned to bed. A strange smell emanated from the locked cellar, but it seems that no one thought too much of it at first. However, Eliza persisted and summoned the help of Eugene Burt's 2 brothers, Monty and Roscoe. She approached them at their shoe shop on Congress Avenue on Tuesday, July 28th, the same day Eugene checked in to his Chicago hotel. Roscoe, who still had a set of keys to Eugene and Anna's residence despite the bad blood between himself and Eugene, went there with a former city health official named Mr. Johnson. Without even needing to enter the home, the 2 men could smell something terrible and hear the intense buzzing of countless flies. They realized that the odor was coming from the cistern in the basement. Sheriff White and Justice Johnson were called over, and soon the remains of Anna and her 2 toddler daughters were recovered. The city physician, Dr. Graves, conducted an examination of the bodies at the store of the same Mr. Miller who had purchased the furniture from Eugene before he left town. It's important to note that during this time period, it was typical for furniture stores to sell coffins. So while it may sound unusual to us, it wasn't so unusual in 1896 for post mortem examinations to take place in a furniture shop and for coffins to be ordered there soon afterward. Dr. Graves determined that Anna, Lucille, and Elinor had each been struck on the right temple and the side of the face with a blunt object. The little girls had also had a blunt object driven into their brains. The victims had handkerchiefs tied tightly around their necks, which Dr. Graves believed had been used to suffocate them first. It later came to be believed that the purpose of the handkerchiefs had been to limit the flow of blood and therefore make the crime scene easier to clean up. Anna had been found wrapped in a blanket with ropes tied around it. The two little girls' wrists and feet had been bound with wires. Investigators did not find any ominous red liquid at first glance when they entered the Burt's house. The walls and floors initially appeared clean, though it's been said that further inspection of the bedroom floor did reveal some stains. Soon, authorities discovered what had been inside some of the crates that Eugene had nailed shut and shipped off a few days earlier, and the lack of messiness at the crime scene made a bit more sense. As it turns out, Eugene had done quite a bit of packing before asking Minnie to help him on the morning of July 25th. And he had not shipped the crates to Dallas, where he and his family were supposedly moving. Instead, he had shipped them to a fictitious recipient in Houston, using a fake sender name and attempting to disguise his handwriting. Authorities found a packing slip in Eugene's trash pile that tipped them off to this scheme. The crates were sent back to Austin and opened. In them were scarlet-stained sheets, pillows, pieces of mattress ticking and cotton from a mattress, curtains, and clothing, along with some of Anna's hats and bonnets and clean clothing that had belonged to Lucille and Elinor. There was also a hatchet, stained crimson. On July 30th, Anna, Lucille, and Elinor were buried at Mount Calvary Catholic Cemetery, all under Anna's maiden name of Powers. Meanwhile, the hunt for Eugene Burt was just getting started. In Chicago, Eugene was using the proceeds from the sale of his furniture to continue staying at the hotel and to dine out daily. He liked to spend his days wandering outside the stock exchange. He never would have guessed that someone in his new city would recognize him, especially when he had shaven his mustache and begun wearing glasses. But as fate would have it, a man named Mr. Poindexter, who had previously run a fruit stand in Austin, was now running a fruit stand in Chicago. Mr. Poindexter still had friends and family in Austin and had received letters from them that mentioned the murders of Anna, Lucille, and Elinor, and mentioned that Eugene Burt, the only suspect, had gone missing. Despite Eugene's efforts to alter his appearance, Mr. Poindexter knew exactly who he was and alerted the police. Despite initially denying his true identity, Eugene was arrested and transported back to Texas. Fewer than 30 days had passed between the crime against his family and his arrest. In his hotel room in Chicago, police are said to have found counterfeit bills, burglary tools, and a hatchet. When the train carrying Eugene Burt stopped in Elgin before moving on to its final destination of Austin, some local Austin reporters managed to get on board and interview him. He claimed that he had gone to Chicago because he feared his arrest for the forgery he had committed at his brother's store was imminent. He also claimed that he couldn't comment on the other charges against him until he saw what the newspapers had to say on the matter. But then he said that when the time arrived for his trial, he would be ready to defend himself and would not need the assistance of any man. Such an enormous crowd had gathered in Austin in anticipation of the accused Eugene Burt's arrival that the sheriff had to sneak him into a carriage to get him to the Travis County Jail. There, Eugene briefly shared a cell with a horse thief, who is said to have become quite nervous when he realized who Eugene was. Eugene's first trial, that's right, first trial, began in November 1896. Hundreds of men and women from all classes and races squeezed into the courtroom to witness the spectacle firsthand. More people packed the streets outside. Prosecutors laid out the evidence against him, focusing especially on what had been inside of the recovered packing crates. The defense called up witnesses, including Minnie Sims, who testified that Eugene had been a devoted husband to Anna and a loving father to little Lucile and Elinor. Through it all, Eugene Burt remained expressionless. Much of the time, he actually kept his eyes closed. It seemed that absolutely nothing could move him, one way or the other. Some speculated that he must have been sedated with morphine. The defense, hired by his brothers Monty and Roscoe, acknowledged that Eugene had killed his wife and daughters, but they argued with the help of testimony from several doctors that Eugene suffered from hereditary insanity, pointing to his mother's history of mania and depression. Eugene's own physician, Dr. McLaughlin, was called to the stand, but he contradicted himself when he said that in general a man who behaved like Eugene would be classified as insane, then went on to state that he had never seen signs of insanity in Eugene during his interactions with him. Ultimately, the jury was not convinced that Eugene had acted out of insanity. Eugene was found guilty but sane and therefore sentenced to hang. Had he been found guilty but insane, he would have been institutionalized. As things stood, he would be brought to the gallows in the courtyard of the Travis County Jail, which was then located at 11th and Brazos, where the Greer Building now stands. But just before his execution was scheduled to take place, Eugene's brother Roscoe filed an appeal and Governor Charles A. Culberson signed a stay on the execution. Eugene was granted a new trial based on the argument that the proceedings of the initial trial had driven him insane, and that an insane man should not be executed. This second trial did not garner nearly as much attention from the public as the previous one had. This time, medical professionals and presumably others involved in the trial went to the jail to discreetly observe Eugene's behavior. He continued to appear emotionless, with a neutral attitude toward his entire situation. Trial number 2 ended in 1897 with a hung jury, as the jurors could not come to a consensus as to whether Eugene was or was not legally insane. On to trial number 3. This time, Eugene was determined to be sane. He was again found guilty and again sentenced to hang. Given how much effort Eugene had put into cleaning up the crime scene and getting rid of the evidence, how he had concocted a story to explain the whereabouts of his family, and how he had attempted to conceal his real identity in a faraway city, it seems that the court was correct in never finding him to be legally insane. Eugene was clearly aware of his actions and knew how wrong they were. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tried to hide what he had done. Another appeal was filed on his behalf, but this time, Governor Culberson would not be swayed. Shortly before his execution, a letter Eugene had written was published in a local newspaper. He said that the outraged law was still outraged because the real killer of his family was already punished by forces not of the law. He went on, "Great God be thanked, the hellish brute that took from me the sweets of life, that snapped the human cords of my heart, that took from me and sent to heaven my loved ones, will never see the fulfillment of the ends of lawful justice. How happy to lay and dream, to hear the howls and shrieks and screams of his tortured soul." Some have suggested that Eugene believed it was a part of him that had taken the lives of Anna and the girls, but that he had cast this part away from the rest of his person, or that God himself had done so. According to this theory, Eugene saw this part of him as already dead, in the throes of eternal damnation. But of course, no one will ever know for certain what Eugene meant when he wrote these words. Eugene was brought to the gallows on May 27, 1898. A doctor who witnessed the execution said that his body seemed to relax when he was hanged, as if he had found peace. Eugene lived for nearly 12 minutes after his neck broke. He was buried at Oakwood Cemetery. It's been said that on the day of his burial, a mysterious woman laid flowers on the gravesite and quietly walked away. She was so well veiled that no one was ever able to determine her identity. Before I conclude, I do want to bring up that after the murders of Anna, Lucile, and Elinor, some people wondered if a teenaged Eugene Burt could have been the servant girl annihilator who terrorized Austin in the 1880s. Eugene had killed his family using the same or a similar weapon to what the servant girl annihilator had used, and he had driven something sharp into the brains of his young daughters, just like the servant girl annihilator had done with a number of his victims, including the aforementioned Susan Hancock. While the driving of an unknown sharp object through the skull does seem to be a particularly eerie similarity, we do need to remember that back in the late 1800s, axes and hatchets were extremely common and easy to find since virtually every household needed to cut firewood. So, the use of an axe or a hatchet as a murder weapon would not have been as distinctive then as it may seem to us now. Personally, I don't believe that Eugene was the servant girl annihilator. But I do think that growing up in Austin and hearing about the servant girl annihilator's crimes, being the son of a doctor who was summoned to perform examinations at the crime scenes, and accompanying his father to at least one of the crime scenes, could have influenced the manner in which Eugene went on to commit the heinous crime against his wife and children. Just one more thing about Eugene Burt and the crimes of the servant girl annihilator. Susan Hancock's daughter, Lena, who was close to Eugene in age and also a teenager at the time of her mother's murder, would go on to run a boarding house as an adult. That boarding house was located at 207 East 9th Street, the former Burt residence and the scene of the murders of Anna, Lucile, and Elinor. So there you have it, the story of the Burt family murders. May Anna, Lucile, and Elinor forever rest in peace together. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, y'all.